So everyone feels quite. What happens here in England is it normal to be quite. What's the word I'm looking for? Reserved. Yes, reserved. Yes. Reserved. Yeah. I feel like getting you all up and start jumping. Come on. Then are we going to have a fitness time or yeah. It's funny, isn't it? Different countries and the way things are in each country. We notice it a lot when we're travelling. Different countries sort of have a different general sort of attitude. In Belgium, it was interesting because it was like everyone was very insular, like everyone going about their business but not looking at anybody else, not seeing what's around them, just going about their business, and everyone's sort of quite disconnected from each other and stuff. Yeah. Every country has different feelings. In Australia, if you ever go there, you'll find everyone's like laid back and doesn't really want to get anything done. Really.
Don't get too excited.
Don't get too excited about things. Yeah. All right. Who's next? Let's. Should we go? Anna, thank you. Let's do it, and then we'll go straight back.
Just got two questions. One of them's a clarification.
Yep.
You mentioned happiness earlier, which sounds nice.
Yes.
Is it true to say that from God's point of view, we have a moral obligation to be ourselves and a moral obligation to be happy?
Yes. Which is interesting. It's like one of the things I recognised early in my own progress in this life was that I wasn't very happy, and that I had a moral obligation to start attempting to strive for happiness. It's not something we often consider doing for ourselves, is it? And I also realised that if I was happy, then I'd be able to also help others be happy. So happiness is like sadness, I suppose. It's infectious, and happiness is more infectious than sadness, actually. So. Yeah, it's a moral obligation to be happy. When I say moral obligation, what it means is that there are everything moral. So if you look at what we mean by moral, we're basically saying morally, we're saying that is God's definition. So it's God's definition, of which I'll shorten, definition of what is truth. So morally, there's things that are true and there's things that are false. So one moral truth is that God wants you to be happy, and in fact God created you to be happy, to experience happiness, but also to desire to strive for happiness as well. And you can understand why, because if a person doesn't strive for something, then they become very listless, and they're also lacking in desire and motivation. So very important to strive for happiness. But most people on earth also are under the mistaken idea that the way to strive for happiness is to avoid all your sadness. And that's where we go very severely wrong, because your sadness is carried around inside your soul. And so you can strive for happiness while you're sad. It's going to be very hard, isn't it? You've got inside your soul, there's all this sadness. Nothing's coming out. Nothing's being let out. And yet we're trying to get happy. The problem with that is if you strive for happiness while you're sad and you don't let the sadness out, you'll eventually enter addictions and eventually sin, striving for happiness, because you're going to be driven by the avoidance of your sadness. So God's designed a system where it's better if you feel and release your sadness so it's not with you anymore, which obviously makes a lot of logical sense. But emotionally, for most of us, it makes not very much emotional sense. So what we do emotionally is we go, But if I've got to be sad before I can be happy, how long will it be before I'm happy? And the answer to that question is quite soon, actually, because what you'll notice is as you release certain sadnesses, you have moments of happiness as a result of releasing the sadness. And so it's not like an all or nothing thing that happens where you'll only be happy right at the end of it. What actually happens is that as you release sadness, you feel a building sense of happiness, which obviously is going to help you strive for more.
Yeah.
Good question, though.
The second part of it, when you had the diagram with aware to awake,
Yep.
it seems to me that a large part of that process is prayer, and something that can help with that process a lot is prayer.
Yeah, now let's look at that for a moment, because that you're basically saying a large part of that process would be to involve God. Well, a person doesn't have to involve God at all, in fact, to become awakened. Of course, if you're going to become awakened on issues relating to God, then you're going to have to involve God. But in order to become awakened, you don't actually have to involve God. It is helpful if you do, because it's going to be much faster. It is also helpful if you do because God knows more than you do. And also he's a constant source of truth, not a variable source. See, every person on earth is a variable source of truth. Even myself, variable source of truth. The reason why it's variable is I only have a finite amount of time. I can't converse to everybody, with everybody. And so the same applies to me as it does to you, in the sense that any person on earth is not going to be able to be the source of all of your truth. But God can be. So this is why it's obviously very helpful to ask God for assistance through the process. But there are many, many billions of spirits, actually, in particular, who don't involve God in the process at all, and yet they become awakened to all of their sin relating to other humans through the compensation process. So you don't have to involve God, but it is very helpful if you do.
Okay, so it's not essential.
No.
But if we want to,
Yep.
but we have a block to prayer.
Well, that's going to be problematic, isn't it? Sort of like, I want to involve God, but I don't really want to involve God.
Yeah.
When you're saying a block to prayer, can you say, if we define prayer as this, prayer is a desire exercise, isn't it? Right? You could say it's a longing. Yeah. And it has to be sincere, which is the definition we said earlier, remember? Sincere. Right? So imagine now, if I don't have a sincere desire or longing to communicate with God and receive answers from God, can you see I'm not going to receive any? So just as simple as that. The law that allows our soul to receive things from God is all based around there being a longing that is sincere, in other words, a passion for what we want to know, and a sincerity in that passion. In other words, not because we want to avoid things, not because we want to get away with things, not because we want to be helped through everything, but rather we have a sincere desire just to know truth, for example. Sincere desire to just experience love, for example. So that's a very different thing than doing it for a motivation that's insincere. Now, if the desire and longing is sincere, then that's classified as a prayer. In other words, that's a prayer that God hears. And God always responds to prayer. So soon as if God hears a prayer, he's going to respond. But when I say God hears, what I mean is that God only listens to requests that are meeting the criteria in harmony with his standard of love. And his standard of love is you have to have a desire, a longing, you have to be sincere. That's his standard. So now that's the standard of prayer. So I can say, I want to involve God, but I don't trust God. So you can see the very first thing I probably should deal with is the fact that I don't trust God. And it's going to be very hard to involve God in a process of where I don't trust God. I'm going to have to work through why I don't trust God probably first, aren't I? Because any prayer I have in that state will be insincere. It won't be sincere. It'll be insincere, the opposite of sincere. And so what I need to do is have a feeling that I do want this thing. Now, if my feeling is that I don't really want it, like don't really want to trust God, for example, then of course that's the prayer. We're really saying to God, I don't really want to trust you. And God goes, okay. And that's it.
Yeah. So what feels like a kind of awkwardness with the process of prayer is actually just a lack of sincerity and desire.
Yeah.
Yeah, and sometimes though, feeling awkward about prayer is because you've got some internal rules about what prayer, like you have to be formal with God, or you have to get it right, you have to do the thing, and sometimes it's even just a lack of connection to the thing. You're getting like, oh, it's just me being real with God and feeling my desires and expressing them to God, you know. So a bit of both, yeah.
Still insincere. Still insincere though, isn't it? Like any little feeling you have that interrupts a longing that is passionate results in insincerity. Do you understand?
Yeah.
So it's sort of like if I have a feeling towards God that I don't really trust him, or I have a feeling that he's going to take me over, right? Have a feeling that he's going to boss me around, have a feeling that he's going to be punishing of me, have a feeling that he's going to be, he doesn't really care about me, then all of those feelings will result in an insincere, like a longing. It does not exist under those circumstances. There's no desire in those circumstances, so naturally there is no prayer. So now I'm on my own. I'm doing it on my own. And obviously the very first groups of emotions that are worth dealing with are the emotions relating to my feelings about God. Because if I can deal with them, then I'm no longer alone dealing with everything else. But that being said, there are many, many billions of people historically in the spirit world who have done it all by themselves. So you can do it by yourself. And this is one of the things that God also wants us all to realise is that, we are self-responsible, powerful beings who are capable of using our will in a very strong manner towards a direction that's loving. We are also very capable of using it towards a direction that's unloving. And God goes, isn't that wonderful? Because I've created a being that is self-determining, that will determine that their own life will be determined largely by their own passions and desires and their own decisions. And your life, and this is where it's very important, is we notice that when we talk about emotion, and particularly emotion relating to childhood issues, childhood harm, we hear a lot of people who say to us things like, oh, because I was harmed in that's why I do this now. And it's not actually true. For the most part, we do the things we do now because we've decided to do them. Now, in some cases, we're deciding to do them to avoid the harm. That is true. But in many cases, we've decided to do them because we just want to be the opposite of what our parents were. Or because we want to sin in our own way. Or, there's lots of reasons why we choose to do what we do and make the decisions we make. Most of which are completely individual and also determined by myself, not anybody else. So a lot of people would like to believe that they are sort of innocent of any sin because other people influenced them to sin. But actually, if you truly analyse your life, you'll see that a lot of your sin is because you wanted to do it. You wanted to go down a certain road. And one of those roads was to not be sincere. most of us learnt in our childhood that we were rewarded in our childhood for being fake, for having a facade. We were rewarded for it. And so we then go through life going, if I'm fake, I'll get rewards. And we start acting in that manner in all of our life, just being fake here and fake there. Of course, from God's perspective, it's not God's standard of love. And so the prayer, whenever we even talk to God, a lot of times it's about, please help me avoid the pain I'm in. So you see this a lot, where a lot of people start saying they want a relationship with God, and you look at the underlying reason why, and for the most part, it's very selfish. Mm-hmm. Now, you having a desire to be happy, by the way, is not selfish. But you having a desire to avoid your pain and suffering is selfish. Right? So there's a complete difference between those two things. And most of us are thinking along the lines like, pain and suffering, good to avoid. Right? And then we go, relationship with God, this is fantastic. God will help me avoid my pain and suffering. And he won't. And the reason why is because pain and suffering is a human creation. Humans created it. So humans have to destroy what they created in order to be happy. Sin is a human creation. We have to learn how to get rid of it by destroying sin. We need to get rid of it. God is requiring as self-responsible beings that we do that. Yeah. So yes, you can pray. It's going to help you a lot, but you've also got to recognise, I'm wanting this from God because I just want to avoid something, or I'm wanting this from God because I want it to be easier than me having to go through a self-discovery process. I want God to be involved in my life because it helps me avoid, my family or my issues with other people. And God is not going to be involved in your life if that's your reason to have God in your life. He wants you to deal with other people. He wants you to sort things out with people. So you can see that to be sincere from the way God measures it is a lot harder than to be sincere the way humans measure it. When we were young, we were taught that you could just say sorry and everyone would forgive you. Right? It said in Portugal, it was like someone twisting you by the ear and taking you somewhere and saying, say sorry. And as a child, you go, no worries, I'll say sorry and say sorry, and everybody forgives you. It's like not how it's going to be with God. Firstly, God's not going to twist your ear and take you somewhere and say sorry. He's going to wait until you have a loving desire to do that yourself. Secondly, he's not going to put pressure on you to do it, aside from the law itself, just bringing events which are a part of the results of you breaking the law. But God's not going to force you. And then at the end of the day, if you did say sorry by being forced, are you really sorry? You're not. So God wants a heart that's sorry. But he wants that from you in the sense that you want that, not because you've been told. Yeah. So that's where God's measure of sincerity is much higher than humans.
Yeah, and I can feel that when you were saying you can do it without God, I'm like, no. But actually, accepting that, and feeling that, and taking action on that takes the pressure off and the demand off this relationship with God that I'm trying to develop.
Certainly, that's true to a degree. It's like for nearly 150,000 years on this planet, over that actually, people didn't have God's help to deal with their sin. But the law was helping them and everything, but they didn't have God's personal help aside from the use of the conscience. There was no love being offered during that time from God directly, the personal love. God loved all humans, of course, but there wasn't that personal love being offered. Since a man and a man passed, which are the first human couple on this earth, actually engaged sin, right the way down to my coming in the first century, there was no love offered. So every single person had to do it by themselves. And they all did. A whole lot of them. There's many billions and billions of spirits you can meet in the spirit world now. And They all did it. They all did this personal responsibility for sin. What God is offering is a gift. He's offering the gift of helping us, which is something that we can either take or reject. He's offering also the gift of his love so that we become more sensitive to the process as well. And on top of that, he's always, all through history, offered the conscience as a mechanism by which we can receive truth. So we can do it. We're taught, unfortunately, on earth that even if we have, for most of us, we're even taught there's no real thing like sin. We're taught there's no such thing. But those of us who are taught there is such a thing, we're taught, it's going to get rubbed away by somebody else. It's going to be, Jesus' sacrifice for your blood, the blood sacrifice is going to absolve you of all your sin. And all of these teachings are very false, of course, and they create an illusion in humanity that if there is such a concept of sin, then somebody else will get rid of it for you. So God is not going to do that for you. He's going to help you, which is different than doing it for you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, I can. Were you going to say something there?
I was just remembering some of the things you were saying.
No, say.
Like, I came to realise in my prayer that a lot of times I was coming to God with the feeling of like asking for love, but really I was asking for the removal of my emotional pain. And I came to realise that's not God's agenda. God can't feel my feelings for me. That's part of the gift that God has given me, that my experience is my own, and that relationship with God is voluntary. It's not forced upon me, and that there'll be no God's not going to take things away from me because God kind of wants me to understand that that's my responsibility. And so unless I'm willing to feel everything for myself, I can't really even feel that God's love is a gift. It's only when I have that understanding of the lesson of humility, that all of my feelings are my own. No one else, God, Mum and Dad, Jesus, no one else is going to actually feel them for me. And that's part of my capacity and self-responsibility that I must develop. Only when I feel that, then do I feel God's love is a gift. And it is something that can educate me further by receiving it about more of my sin. And if I engage repentance, God can help me with the causes. But even to engage repentance, I must reach the point where I'm willing to feel everything myself, and I want to. So, it's interesting with prayer. Like through praying more, I've realised, a lot of my prayer is so sinful because it's actually wanting God to alleviate some of my feelings rather than educate me or just to receive love. And even when I was asking for love, I realised, I just think love is going to be the solution to my hard feeling, and none of that's true. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah. And I think if you got a feeling from your childhood of like, God, I had to do everything on my own, and it was so hard, and I had no help. And then all of a sudden, you're like, there's this incredible being, and you're like, great, sign me up. But you're bypassing the original pain.
Yes.
Correct.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's right.
Yeah.
So really helpful.
Yeah, and perhaps we should mention at this point what God's love does for you as well if you do receive it, because it's important to understand that. To understand the mechanism that happens as a result of receiving love. So, as we've already pointed out, you have to have a feeling that you would like or desire to have God's love in your heart. You have to develop, obviously, a sincere longing or desire to receive it. And that's because God gave you, as Mary pointed out, the gift of free will, right? Which says you're allowed to stop something or do it. You're allowed to make decisions. You're allowed to have... And your free will is very much based on your soul. And remember, we said earlier that the soul, one of its primary functions is emotional, right? So the expression of your free will is actually mostly emotional, right? your intellect is just responding a lot of times to the emotion. So a lot of the use of your free will revolves around how free you are, how loving your emotions are versus how unloving your emotions are. If you have unloving emotions, then you will exercise your free will generally in an unloving way. And if you have loving emotions, you will generally exercise your free will in a loving way. Okay? So it's all about the expression of your free will. So firstly, God's teaching you your free will, the will that God gave you, the capacity to make choices, decisions, and all of those things. That will is driven by your emotional condition. It's a very important thing to understand. So once we know that that's true, the free will is driven by our emotional condition, then obviously we need to have some sensitivity to emotion in order to engage our free will properly. Otherwise, we're just sort of like robots going, I have to do this, I'll do that, I have to do this, I'll do that, rather than being, I want to do this, I want to do that. Right? So the emotion will start driving us. Now, if the emotion drives us towards receiving God's love, then of course the emotion develops into you could call it a passionate desire, which we would define as a longing, so that's a longing to receive God's love. So that you can see your free will is being exercised to feel emotions where you long for love. Now, when that love, that actually causes a connection with a conduit, which I called the Holy Spirit in the first century. The reason why I called it the Holy Spirit was God has lots of spirits. Like he has you could call his spirit his energy. So he has a happy spirit. So that's how he experiences all of his happiness. You could say he has a reflective spirit, a wise spirit. These are all, when I say spirits, what I mean is energy, different types of energy coming from God, right? And so God has, and even the operation of the conscience is a truthful spirit. So it's an energy coming from God that interfaces with our soul that allows truth to be transmitted from God's soul to ours. And so God's got all of these spirits. And what I wanted to do in the first century is say, right, this is all of God's energy, if you want to call, so I'm basically saying spirit is like energy. This is all God's energies, of which, by the way, he has an infinite number of, right? And there's all of these energies, but there's a special energy which is just used for the transmission of his love to the human soul. And so that's why I called it the Holy One, the best one, if you like, the most, you could say, the most precious one, right? Because it's the energy that God has and the connection that establishes this connection that allows God's love, which is very transformative to the human, to actually change the human into a new creature. So it's a very precious form of energy, the Holy Spirit. And that Holy Spirit is activated by passionate, desirous longing. So now that it's activated, now God's love can flow into the human soul. That's what causes it to flow. So you get, there's an establishment of the connection, and God's love now starts to flow into the human as a result of that connection. Now, God's love doesn't change your sin. It causes you to be more sensitive to sin, but it doesn't get rid of your sin. Because a lot of ways your sin is the effect. So we need to have a short sort of discussion about the difference between cause and effect, right? So in a pure manner, you could say there are some things that cause other things to occur, isn't it? So we could call them the causes of things, right? Now, physically, there's all sorts of things we could use as a description of that. So an example, a house gets built. That's the effect. What caused it? Substantially, someone had a desire to do it. Then they decided to get all the resources together to do it. Then they decided they have to use those resources in such a manner that you can make a house rather than a tent, or a car, or a mess. Right? They had to put all the resources together in such a way. So there had to be planning, design. So you could say all of those things are the causes, and then the effect was house got built. That's the effect. Right? Now, you could say that many of your sins are you could say much of your pain and suffering. So effect is pain and suffering of your sins. All right? The cause of the pain and suffering is sin, which is actually the desire to do things out of harmony with love that eventually will cause these effects. Right? Now, these effects are our creations. Human creations. And they are created by another cause, which is also a human creation. Right? Our desire to live out of harmony with the law, which is the primary cause of sin, actually. So you could say, in a way, sin has effects and causes, both of which were created by humans, not by God. By humans disobeying the law or desiring to disobey the law, the effect is pain and suffering, but the effect that's caused by the desire to engage things out of harmony with law, right, which is sin. So you can see that the sin itself can't be erased by God, right? We need to take responsibility for erasing it. But when we receive love, there's an interesting thing that happens, and that is the reasons why we wanted to sin. So remember, the sin is the human creation. The desire of why we were motivated to sin, God can address, right? Because that comes from all different kinds of sources. And if you're humble and you desire God to help you with these causes, then the causes can be eradicated. So the beauty of driving the cause of sin is the desire to sin, obviously. But underlying that desire to sin, there are reasons why we choose to take actions that are out of harmony with love. And when you receive some of God's love, you become more sensitive to them. You become open to getting rid of them. You desire to get rid of them. And that puts you into a place called repentance. In a state of repentance, the cause of the sin, God's love can help eradicate. So now the reason why you wanted to do the thing can be addressed. Not the thing itself. So the sin is the thing itself that you do out of harmony with the law. The reason why you did it can be now addressed by God's love entering the soul. So the beauty of also involving God is that you get this additional help where instead of having to work on the causes for centuries, you can actually ask for that love, and that love as it comes will start addressing the causes without you having to deal with those causes yourself. But in order for this to happen, you have to have an awakening that the cause exists. So in other words, I can't be repentant for something I don't know anything about. I've got to know about it. I've got to be awakened to it in order to repent for it. And this is where most people get tripped up when it comes to receiving God's love. They sort of want a magical pill that just says, take the pill, everything's cured. Right? Rather than going, I have to first work out what I need cured before I can sincerely ask God for love to address that thing. that means I have to have had an awakening before I can ask God about the thing. Now, the awakening process, as we mentioned, is right from awareness all the way through many steps to the point where we know what we're asking about.
Yeah.
That's the thing that most people don't want to do. They want God to just magically go abracadabra, like whatever, and boom, and poof, and bang, you're done, and it's all sorted, right? It's some magical, fancy thing. And in fact, there's many people really attracted to that concept. So the Christian abracadabra is Jesus' blood. Does that make sense? In their philosophy, Jesus' blood is the magical thing. That all you got to do is believe in Jesus' blood and saving you, and bang, you're saved, and then you don't have to deal with your sin. Imagine if that was actually true. That would mean that you would not have to be aware of any of your sins at all. Now, if you're not aware of any way in which you sin, there's a high likelihood you're going to do it again, even if the sin's gone, right? If you're not aware. You need to become aware in order to not do something again. So it makes no logical sense to believe in that belief. And of course it's not true. But we want to believe it, In some New Age philosophy, reincarnation is the solution. So what's that saying? If you don't rub out your sin from last time, you got another chance to rub it out this time. So it's just another philosophy teaching you that there is a way, and a sort of a magical process that, well, it's not very magical. It's actually, if you think about it, it's quite sort of dark process if you think about the whole concept of reincarnation, because it's basically saying, if I don't get things right this time, next time my life's going to be worse, but unfortunately I can't remember what it was like last time as to what caused it next time, so that's not very nice. And so, it gets very confusing very fast if you go along that line. It's a very unloving belief, obviously, but again, people would like to believe it. I've got the life I've got right now because I'm getting either rewarded or punished for something I did in the past. Of course, I don't know what that thing was, but I'm being rewarded or punished for it. So if I've got a really lovely life right now, it means I was really good in the past. Right? Isn't that wonderful? And if you've got a terrible life right now, it just is because you were bad in the past. So now when it comes to my responsibility to love you, I'm going, I don't need to love you because you did bad things in the past, that you deserve what you got now. Right? So there's all this false belief that comes from that belief, which is very opposite to wanting to become a more loving person in the moment. And so God expects from us that we go through this process because we want to become more loving people. And that's the fundamental desire that should drive us as to why we would like to have God's love in our life, because we want to be more loving people. And that's more loving to self, but it's also more loving to others, more loving to the environment, more loving to God even, more loving to our children, more loving to our friends, more loving to our partner. That's what should be the thing driving us, right? But for most of us, when we start asking for love, it's because we just feel unloved. So in other words, it's not a good motivation. It's actually a very selfish one. So I've been unloved all my life, I want God to love me. Not, I've been unloving all my life and I need to learn how to love, and God's love can teach me. Right? Which would be a far better motivation. So when God's love comes, it can begin if I'm repentant and I have found inside of me my sin, I've awakened to my sin. I can ask for forgiveness and God's love can come. And actually in that process of repentance, it clears away the reason why I did the thing. So the actual reason why I did it, which might be very hard to find, gets cleared away, and I won't do it anymore.
Yeah, and the awakening to our own selfishness is such a huge part of that. and not to like judge ourselves for it. And I don't know, that's just one thing I've learned a lot from you guys, is like being called up on my selfishness that I didn't want to see.
Yep.
It's like so crucial to this whole process.
Yeah, unfortunately for most of us, we feel so unloved in our life that we're sort of desperate to be loved, which also generally means we're not desperate to love. Unfortunately, it's very one-sided. It's not, for most of us, it's sort of like, I want Mary to love me, not I want to love Mary. You know, same with God. I want God to love me. I don't want to love God. I don't want to be a more loving person. I just want I want to just avoid the feelings of being unloved, actually, if you think about it. So if the purpose of us receiving God's love is to avoid being unloved, given the fact of what we learned about the soul, and it's emotional and everything, God designed it that way, can you see it's against even the design of the soul for God to respond? So naturally God doesn't. So what we see is that a lot of people are not receiving love because they're avoiding the feelings of being unloved. And they want God to make those feelings go away. And of course that's avoiding emotion, which is actually a selfish act. Yeah. So very important to bear that in mind. But if you can remember this process, and then you can remember, okay, the beauty of this process is God's love, if I'm repentant, which means I have to become awakened to the sin. If I'm awakened to my sin and I feel like I want it to be corrected, now God's love sort of can reach in your soul and take away the reason why you sinned in that particular way. So you have to acknowledge the sin and understand the sin, and to a large degree also you'll start to understand why you did it even in that place. But in terms of dealing with why, God's love can deal with why and remove it. And it's the beauty of the divine love process, like receiving God's love, because the people who don't do that have to take the sin out of themselves by themselves, which people have done, but it takes many years generally to do. Yeah. Of course, God designed you to be perfect, so He didn't put sin in there in the first place. That only came in through human desires, being out of harmony with God's laws. So we can all do it, but it's just whether how much, like, do you want help to do it, or, like, to my mind, it's far better getting help to do it than it is to just do it all by yourself, and then you still, after you've done it all yourself, you still won't have a relationship with God anyway. So, and the relationship with God brings many, many other blessings other than just sin. Because remember, when you progress, so if you think about your sin is a temporary condition, right? So remember, we're drawn before the spheres of the spirit world. 1, 2. These are all different gradients, you could call them, aren't they, of love. And, you know, the time when you become at one with God in love is the transition into the 8th sphere. You can see that all of these places are different sort of gradients of love, right? So these are all God's definition of love. You can't enter the 2nd sphere unless you accept God's definition of love that's in the 2nd sphere. And if you can't enter the 3rd unless you accept God's definition of love that's in the 3rd sphere. And by the way, all the spheres below the 6th, so from 5 down, were all created by humans. God created the potentiality of them existing, but not the reality of them. Humans, by lowering their condition of love, created those spheres. They're areas of the spirit world. And every earth, there's 7 earths, and every earth has this gradient system of different areas or dimensional spaces that exist based on how much love you have. So every one of them has the same design. So every one of them, the perfect natural man arrives here. So when you conceive a child, that's where it arrives, there. And when the child is born, generally it's here or here, because it's already absorbing the parents' and society's sin. But it's still much better than where Earth is, because Earth is actually here, halfway up the first sphere. That's where the most places on Earth actually exist, in terms of the spheres of love, like in terms of the gradient of love. So really like quite hellish condition on Earth, because the first sphere contains the hells. And this is why we've got bad problems on Earth, because our condition of love is not good. So when you look at this, if you can get God's help to deal with the reason why you sin, as long as you recognize what you are awakened to why you sin yourself, then God's love can help you deal with the reason why you sin in that particular way, right? But if you can't see that you're sinning in a particular way, there's nothing to sincerely pray about. There's nothing you can talk to with God about, because you don't know that you're even sinning yet, right? And so this is why it's very important to understand the process of receiving God's love and what it does. Now, when you receive the love, now you can start, you can see that the reason why we might be, say, in the first sphere condition might be, there will be because I've sinned. Obviously, that's the primary reason. But the cause of why I sinned, the reason behind why I sinned, I may not know. But a person who has to progress without God's love, they have to know what that cause was, and they have to correct it, and they have to repair it as well. They have to do those things. A person who receives some of God's love, you will actually, through the process, firstly you have to awaken, so you have to know how you sinned. But then what happens is you receive some of God's love, and not only does the love cause you to get rid of the reason why you sinned, but also it helps you take the proper corrective and repairing actions, because you're now sensitive to what you need to do. Right? So it helps you do a lot of things that would otherwise not be, you'd have to work out yourself to do otherwise.
Jay, I think where you were headed was,
yep,
because you were talking.
I was headed somewhere.
You were. I knew where you were going. You were talking about longing for God's love to try and alleviate our pain.
Yeah.
And I believe the point you were going to make is not only does that not work, but once you reach the 7th sphere and enter the 8th sphere, you no longer have any pain, but you're still longing for God's love.
Because remember, every sphere below the 6th, we should say, means you are sinning against humans in some way or another. And above the 6th to the 8th, you are sinning against God some way or the other. Does that make sense? The perfect natural man is in the 6th sphere, so he's free of sin against humans. But below the 6th sphere, you still have sins against people, right, that need to be addressed. And between the 6th and the 7th, you have sins against God that needs to be addressed if you want to ever progress above the 7th sphere. So you can see that, as Mary pointed out there, this point down is all about sort of not only just dealing with sin, but also dealing with desire. I suppose you could say you have to do both. But above that point is just dealing with desire. Growing in desire. Below that point, it's sin and desire that needs to be addressed. You follow? But you can see your sin after the 7th sphere to 8th sphere transition is gone. That means sin is temporary. It will dissipate. I'll just get over it. Jesus
has been talking a lot. Not just today. But for 6 weeks. When we're alone together, we don't talk at all now.
I've been talking for sometimes 3 or 4 days, and then Mary and I will talk together for 3 or 4 days.
And sometimes we catch up with people and you talk some more. A lot of talking.
Yeah. Okay, so you can see sin, temporary. And this is a very good thing to know, right? That sin is temporary, because dealing with it means that it's only a short-term proposition. Which is a good thing to know, right? Yeah.
It's getting started with the awakening that feels like the hardest part sometimes.
It is the hardest part.
Yeah.
The hardest part is the awakening. Yeah. Yep. So we're going to go back with the mic. Yep. There.
To Emily.
No, next to Emily it was first.
Oh, next, yep.
And then we'll go to Emily. That's right. Hold the mic up to your chin. Just on your chin, that's it.
So if you've reached a point where you're suffering
Yeah.
a lot.
Don't be afraid to touch the mic on your chin.
Touch the chin.
Yeah.
So if you reach the point where you're in a state of suffering,
Yep.
and you're still not aware of the sin that's causing it.
Yep.
So
What do you do?
what do you do?
Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
Yeah. A very good question, actually, because let's look at like how suffering comes about, shall we? So you're talking now about mostly physical suffering?
Yes.
Yep.
So you've got a particular suffering.
Yep. So a particular body problem,
Yeah.
particular thing happening that causes you physical distress,
Yes.
that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yep. And what?
And it's constant.
And it's constant. Yep.
Shall I tell you what it is?
Join the club. I've had many constant things that have gone on for years and years and years. So this is a common thing. We need to understand why it comes about, right? So
Yeah.
to undo a problem, you need to understand how it got created. Makes sense, doesn't it? So let's look at the soul. So you've got your half of the soul, male attraction too, I think.
Yeah.
Is it? Yep. Yep. Okay. So this is you. Here's your two bodies. Spirit body, physical body. When sinful emotions exist in the soul, and remember the sin can come not only from you, but it also can come from your forefathers, can't it? Because you can absorb in the womb, in particular, you could say emotions and beliefs that come from your parents are absorbed from the moment of incarnation, and the moment of incarnation is the time of your conception. So from that moment on, you're absorbing things from the environment around you, you're experiencing things. And inside the womb is very interesting because your mother and father have a large degree of responsibility for what you feel when you're inside the womb. So if mum and dad are arguing and fighting constantly, you're going to feel that inside the womb. If they have belief systems that are like out of harmony with love, out of harmony with God's truth, you're going to absorb some of those belief systems. If they have emotions that are like feel bad about themselves, they feel terrible about themselves, then you're going to absorb some of that emotionally as well. And this is all happening because inside of the womb, you haven't got the the capacity to reject things yet. You haven't learnt how to reject feelings, and you haven't learnt how to reject thoughts or beliefs yet. And so in the womb, it's a very sensitive time because you haven't learnt how to stop things from entering you, so that they sort of just come in at you all the time. Now, of course, that process means that inside of your soul, there are feelings that you have by the time you're born. Even there's feelings that you have, that are out of harmony with truth and love. Now, you might not have yet sinned though, right, yourself, because your parents' sin has entered you, but you haven't acted upon it yet. You haven't learnt that you're allowed to act and do whatever you like yet. And in the first 7 years of your life, you start learning that. You start learning, I can take this action, I can take that action. Unfortunately, some of the actions are going to be based upon the sin you've already imbibed from your parents. So unfortunately, you're going to choose sometimes, if you don't see what's going wrong, which most people don't do until they're 5 or 6. Of course, the conscience is still working, telling you, like if you decide to lie, your conscience will bother you when you're a child if you try to lie. But there's a tendency to ignore it because you want to lie, because you want to get things and so forth. And so there's a tendency then to act in a manner that's out of harmony with love, based upon a mixture of the injury you received and your own desire as well. So two of them combine together, and then you take actions. Right? So in that place, you start sinning. In that sin occurs in the soul. And particularly what it does is it damages you on an emotional level. You follow? Yeah. So what happens is, with sin, remember I said up here sin equals and things like that. If you look at what sin is doing, sin is emotion, entering you as emotion out of harmony with love. Should we just call it unloving emotion? But what I mean by that is that it's out of harmony with God's love, that emotion that now exists in your feeling state, and that exists in your soul. Now, sin causes it, the sins of others cause it, and your own decisions cause it. There's a lot of different reasons why it's there, right? Now, because that exists now as feelings in your soul, and many of these feelings are actually against love of you. And then there's feelings that are against love of others. So you could say there's two types of feelings in a way. There's ones that refer to your love of others. Right? And there's one that refers to your love of self. There's also, of course, ones that refer to love of the environment. There's ones that refer to love of God. Can you see? There's all different types of loves that we may have. But if you look at these love of others versus love of self thing for a moment, whenever there's a sin that causes you to lack love for yourself, right, you will start exhibiting emotional problems in your body. Because all of the energy flow now is against yourself. When you have sins that are a lack of love towards others, you will be influencing their bodies, not your own. Now, God actually treats sins against love of others as worse than love of self even, because you're actually affecting someone else above or beyond their will. Whereas when you do a lack of love of self, you're willingly engaged in doing it to yourself. Do you follow me?
Yeah.
Now, because you're willingly engaged in sinning against yourself, there is going to be a net result where the emotions that would normally flow, freedom of emotion that normally would flow in the body, that maintains the spirit body and the physical body, so it's in the soul, and it maintains those two bodies, the energy pathways in these bodies will get damaged. The spirit body is the first one to get damaged. And so what happens is what you know, maybe you've heard of as chakras, which are really just energy points in your body that cross over. There are around about 192 energy points in a normal body. And when I say a normal body, I mean a spirit body that hasn't received God's love. So just a normal human. In a spirit body of a person who has received God's love, there are far more. But in one who's just in a normal state, There's 192 points of crossovers, and every point generally crosses over in specific places like organs of your body, different joints in your body, there are crossovers and so forth. And wherever you don't love yourself, your body, your spirit body first, will start having energy breakdown. And so you could say the general flow of a problem is, firstly, emotion existing in the soul, that is sin, full emotion.
Can we call that emotion? It's sort of sinful emotion or unloving emotion existing almost as truth when we've decided it's truthful, haven't we?
Of course, yeah.
Yeah.
But it is. So let's just call it sinful emotion, shall we?
We believe it's righteous in some way.
We believe it's the right thing to do, but from God's perspective, it's wrong. Yeah? Of course, with most sin, we wouldn't commit it unless we believed it was right. Isn't that true? Like, you wouldn't lie unless you thought it was a good thing to do. You wouldn't, you wouldn't steal if you thought it, unless you thought it was a good thing to do. Most of us, the things we do wrong, we do because we think it's good, right? But these are emotions that are against God's love, so therefore sinful in nature. So the sinful emotion gets now reflected into a breakdown of the energy systems. So it's energy, sinful energy, you could say, being imposed upon the bodies. And I better spell it now. All right? So it's a breakdown of how God designed the body to have its energy flow, the spirit body in particular. That then causes, if we don't fix it, it then causes an energy breakdown. Let's just say, let's put there, this is in the physical body, energy breakdown, and that causes spirit body, energy breakdown first, physical body, energy breakdown, right, in the physical body. So that starts causing physical problems. It starts with pain, right? So the first part of it is pain, and then if it continues, it'll turn into suffering. In other words, it's a pain that just goes on and on and on and on and on and just gets worse.
But my pain.
If you put the up page in.
My pain is tinnitus in my left ear.
Yep.
And it's not exactly painful.
No, but it's annoying.
It's constant and
Yes. So constant ringing in one ear.
yeah,
Yep. Okay.
really high pitched ringing
Yeah.
in one ear.
Yeah.
And it causes me distress.
That's
constantly.
right. That's right. Left ear, right?
Yeah.
So there's a reason for it. There's obviously sin going on, right?
Yeah.
And what I'm saying is there's a sinful emotion that it begins with, right? You want to know what it is?
Yeah.
You don't want to listen to women. It's about your mum,
Oh.
not wanting to listen to your mum.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, she's annoying.
Yeah, she's annoying. Yeah. But you feel you have to listen to her, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you keep putting yourself in a position where you are listening to her, and you really don't want to listen to her, right? You fine?
So it's simple.
It's very simple, yeah. but hard to get rid of the emotion sometimes, right? Okay, so that then causes down this causes a effect in your spirit body where you're not wanting to hear women, and so this blocks up this area on your left side, your side of the body that affects all your hearing starts to be affected. And because it's a sin, you're not actually addressing your mother and saying you don't want to listen to her anymore and you're not going to have a relationship with her anymore while she's still berating you and putting you down and all these other things, right? And because it's you feel you're wrong if you do all of that, but actually you'd be right to do all of that, but you feel you're wrong. So you're believing the sin is righteous. You think it's right to just put up with this constant stuff coming from your mum, right? As an act of sort of loving her, right?
You know, in order for something to get to a physical issue, you have to believe, you have to have no awareness or awakening to the sin emotionally.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it wouldn't manifest into a
So that
physical
says to me, you're not seeing that it's actually wrong to not have an argument with your mum. You think not having an argument with your mum and just putting up with her until she passes is a good thing. And it's not a good thing. Not for her or for you, actually. Right? You need to have an argument with her and say, Mum, tired of this whole berating thing that goes on, this constant annoying process that goes on. And then the problem with this particular problem is you're also attracting some spirits, women spirits, who like to berate you as well, right? Because you haven't dealt with your mum. So you're also attracting them. And you don't want to hear them, so all you hear instead is this constant whining that goes on in your ear, but not intelligible, right? Because it's just annoying all the time. And you're not feeling your annoyance about it or your frustration with women about it, and particularly with your mum and women like her, right? So there's a spirit body energy breakdown that occurs. The energy in your spirit body in this area, it gets affected. And then as that gets affected, you now have a physical problem coming. Initially, it's just an energy problem, which then gets worse and worse and worse until it turns into a physical symptom. So by the time you've got a physical symptom, there's already a lot that's been denied. That makes sense to you? Yeah. So it starts with that simple emotion, which is, I've got to keep listening to women that I don't want to listen to, which is really about not wanting to listen to mum, right, because she's annoying. So that then turns into the breakdown of your spirit. You're actually controlling your own spirit body in a way to try to turn off your hearing towards women, right? So it's a purposeful action taken because you don't want to deal with your mum in a more proactive manner. You don't want to have a fight with her, an argument with her. You don't want her to go, I don't want you in my life anymore, right? Because you feel you still need her. And so you're not going to have the conversation or the disagreement. So now you're going to have to shut yourself down. Remember I said any love of self issue is going to cause an issue in your own body. So you're prepared to shut down your own hearing rather than have an argument with your mother.
Yeah, I am.
Yeah?
Yeah.
That's the cause of the problem. Now, you can see the sin is that you really, if you're honest, you would need, if you were truthful, you would need to have the disagreement with your mother. You'd need to go, Mum, you're overbearing, you're always at me, or, you know, I'm sick of listening to you. It's really annoying being in your company. And unless you change this, Mum, I don't want a bar of you. I don't want you in my life. I don't want to put up with you. I don't want to be around you at all. Can you see that might trigger other feelings you have, right? Of guilt and all sorts of other things. But that's what needs to happen if you want to cure this particular problem. So what you end up doing in that state, and because it's aimed at a lack of love of self, there's going to be pain and suffering in your body, not in hers. Right? She's going to feel like fine. Her hearing's fine, right? Yeah. Yours hearing is not fine. Right? So you can see that when we lack love of self and we're unwilling to act in harmony with what love of self demands, then we are going to affect our own bodies. And therefore we'll have a breakdown of our own bodies in some way or another to the point where either they're constantly annoying and eventually can turn into pain and suffering and even death. Like a person who has cancer dies from it, oftentimes, right? And that's an example of an sort of extreme example that a person would rather die than deal with what they're giving out to others. They'd rather die than do it. So they'd rather have an extreme lack of love of self than they would deal with other people in their life. Right? So every physical problem you exhibit in your body is a direct reflection of your lack of desire to love yourself. Now, I've had a lot of lack of love of self in my life, so I've had lots of physical problems in my body. Lots and lots. and it's taken me many years sometimes to solve them. But every one that I deal with, the actual cause, the physical problem goes away completely. Right? Just in this trip, I was pretty much abused and attacked by spirits for 7 days when we arrived in Belgium. I couldn't sleep at all, so I had 7 days without sleep or whatever. I eventually got into some emotions. I went through some emotions. I said to Mary the next day I'm going to be better, and I was. And then not only was I better, but a lot of my bowel problems are now all different as a result. So I had bowel removed when I was 18 months old. And all of those problems are starting to heal themselves now.
And also your lower back as
And my
well.
lower back too. Up until a few years ago, I was really struggling to stand up for a long time. On this trip since Belgium, I've been fine standing up. I don't feel any pain at all the whole day. But these have all changed from just dealing with one thing that I was dealing with. I cried for 6 hours. So I dealt with the thing, and things have changed from my body. That's because before then there was a lack of love of self about the issues, which was all about accepting attack from other people and sort of believing it as well, rather than feeling it was wrong. And so lack of love of self caused those physical problems, right? Now, as I said, a lack of love of others causes a lot of physical problems generally for others, because all of your energy is aimed at others. But from God's perspective, the sin still exists in yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And people who have a lack of love of others generally have a lot more difficulty dealing with it, because they exhibit less problems towards themselves. So they sort of go, I'm healthy, so I don't have to deal with anything. That kind of thing. But the other person they're living with is getting more and more and more unhealthy. Right?
So if you see in your children,
Yep.
yes, they've got physical problems,
Yeah.
you are probably the cause of those.
Highly likely, yes. Yeah, shutting them down in some way, causing them to shut down themselves. Children are very sensitive to adults trying to shut them down emotionally. Right? As you well know, right? When you were children, you were very sensitive probably to adults trying to shut you down. So the more a child feels that it's being shut down emotionally, the more it blames itself for that state, the more likely it is to exhibit physical problems. Yeah. Of course, if it blames others, it's more likely to be free of physical problems. Which isn't better, by the way, is it? It's actually worse from God's perspective. But it demonstrates in a way, though, doesn't it, how important God views love of self? Yeah. Because, yeah. That answered your question there?
Yeah.
So the basic principle is sinful emotions cause spirit body energy to dissipate. That causes physical body's energy to dissipate in the area where you have the sinful emotion is affecting you. And then that will cause initially some pain or discomfort. And then eventually that turns into suffering if it continues a long period of time. So by the time we're suffering, we're already in a lot of detunement, and we're going to have to undo quite a lot. So in the case of you with your mum, you're in this pattern with your mum of just feeling like, I've got to listen to her even though I don't want to do anything she says, right? And that's how you feel, isn't it? Pretty much. And so it's sort of like, I've got to put up with her, if I love her, I've got to put up with her and all this kind of stuff. But it's not true. And
like she loves me.
use the mic.
I feel like she is the only person who loves me.
Yeah, not true. She doesn't love you at all, actually. But you don't want to accept that or feel that, and that's why you're prepared to deal with her unloving behaviour without saying anything. Does that make sense to you? And that's why you want to do it. And it's a sinful emotion. So it's going to cause you discomfort. And same towards yourself. And you're doing it for a reason, to be loved. That's the reason, because you think you're not going to be loved if you don't have a disagreement with your mum. You think that she'll change, and she might actually. You know, if she's so used to, being critical and like telling you what to do and just being generally bossy in your life and and she's very used to it, of course when you stop her from doing it, she's going to be pretty upset. Can you see how you feel about addressing her? You don't want to, do you? It's like,
this is what I was meaning. The simple emotion is you got to be holding it like very closely, like something that you really treasure and that's going to be right for you in order for you to get to the point of physical suffering.
There's a whole stream of events that have to happen to get to the point of physical suffering, and it all begins with that emotion. And the intensity of which a person wants to hold on to the emotion will determine how long this goes on for.
Yeah.
So you can feel in you do not want to have any confrontation with your mum. She won't love you if you do. And if she doesn't love you, then you've got no one loving you in your whole world, is what you feel. But that's not true. You've got God who loves you. You've got some spirit friends actually who love you. Your guide, your guardian loves you. So you've got people who love you, just not necessarily people on earth. Right? But you are thinking your mum loves you, but how does a person love you if they keep on at you, not respecting your will, right? So that's not...
There's a lot of things I don't do because of fear of her disapproval.
That's
I'd
right.
like to take my kids out of school, but I can't imagine she'd have a meltdown.
Yeah, you do a lot of things because of her disapproval. Yeah, which is the reason why you don't want to really hear her anymore. but you still feel like you have to do the things, right? Yeah. And it's that resistance that you feel about changing it that's going to cause this to continue.
And get even worse.
And get potentially even worse, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, my father has the same problem, but in the same era, actually. He doesn't like listening to women.
It's quite a common problem.
It's a very common problem. Yeah, you can see why there, right? Because most of us don't want to address issues with other people. We'd rather just put up with whatever we have to listen to from them without actually addressing them and having a conflict. So we think it's unloving to have a conflict, or we think most of the time we don't even get that far. We feel that if we have a conflict, then they won't care for us in the future. They won't love us in the future. The reality is, from God's perspective, they're not loving us right now. You know, if I have to have a conflict with Mary in order to resolve an issue of love, then that means she didn't love me right now. Does that make sense? If Mary has to raise issues with me that with regard to love, then it means I wasn't loving her right now, right? So obviously our resistance to dealing with anything is often because we just don't want to feel the unloved emotion. We just don't want to feel that. Yeah.
Could I start with that before I confront that?
Sorry.
I start with feeling the unloved before I would have a...
Yeah, it's not going to work that way. You've already done that for how many years? You already know you're unloved, right? And you already know that you can't speak up. You already know that your mum might disapprove of you if you do. You already know that, so you already know you're not really being loved, right? So you feeling about it obviously hasn't happened yet. The fastest way to feel a certain feeling is to take an action, and then you'll feel the feeling.
A truthful moral action.
A truthful moral action.
It's not about being nasty, it's about growing in your love of self.
Yeah.
The other person might think you're being nasty, but that doesn't mean you are.
No, I can't put up your crap anymore. Huh? Mum goes, what crap? You say, you always natter. You want me to do things that feels like I've got to constantly earn your love, but I've also got to just sit there and listen to it. The whole time I'm with you, I've got to sit there and listen to you constant, what you want me to do, what you think is right for me to do, and we've got to listen to it the whole time, and I'm sick of it.
You don't talk that much anymore.
I know. Well, of course you don't. You just put up with it, right?
Don't answer me.
Yeah.
You're just further proving our point.
Yeah. Proving our point the more you talk. Yeah. Lack of love of self is always going to cause physical problems in your own body.
It's funny how we fight for a lack of love of self, isn't it? In our sin.
Because we think we're going to be unloved, by someone else if we love ourselves. And also, a lot of us don't realise that actually we don't want to love ourselves, because if we love ourselves, we let everybody else off the hook for loving us. They don't need to love us anymore. And the beauty of that, though, is that the people who do love you will love you. It won't be because of whatever you do or say, or they'll just love you because of you being you. Right? That's not what you experience with your mum. She loves you in your mind because of what you agree with her about, which is not the same as her actually loving you under all circumstances. Love yourself.
Hi.
Hi.
Thanks for being here.
It's a pleasure.
I wanted to ask a question about the deconstruction process, and there's all the list of things to become awakened to, all the addictions. There's like a big list. There is a list. You were saying recently there is an actual list.
Yep.
I started going through the first one, and I just realised there was a whole load of things in the process that I thought God thought, and all of the going through that. Like, in terms of creating, it's an addiction, as you said, to write things down, but with the denial, I feel like I need to have everything written down to work through, because there's so many things to work through. And like, what did you do? Did you have like pages and pages of like 8 things for an addiction that you then found the fear and then found the...
Yeah, well, let's look at practically, I suppose, how it will work, right? So, of course, when we first start this process, we usually start because there's a lot of pain and suffering in our own personal life. Remember this diagram here, we've got, a lot of this in our life, and so we go, we want to change some things. So we sort of start thinking along the lines of, I want to change a few things in my life to reduce my pain and suffering, basically. And so at this stage, we're not really in an awakening process, are we? We're just sort of going, in some ways it's a little selfish too, isn't it? Because it's going, I'm in pain, so I need to change something. It's a good thing, by the way, to see that, but it's not the end result really in the long run. Because the end result in the long run is, I want to be more loving, is really the thing we're aiming for. But at this stage, we're just in this sort of pain and suffering. And when somebody tells us, it's because of our sin, we go, And then somebody sort of explains it to us as to how that's the case. And this happens all the time in the spirit world, by the way. There's every single person who's ever helped in the spirit world has this explained to them. Right? So this is going on for... If you don't go through this process here, you'll go through it there. Somebody will come along and explain what's going on in your life and the reason why you're in pain. And, at some point you'll need to make some decisions. So at this stage, somebody sort of explains it. So Jesus comes along into your life, explains it. And then you go, okay, I've got to find my sins. Sort of is an intellectual concept, isn't it? Sort of like, in my mind I'm thinking, if my sin is the cause of my pain and suffering, and I'm being told that, and I actually sort of think that might be true, then I've got to go and find my sins. So what do? A lot of us get out our portable whiteboard and notepad, and we go, I need to make a list. Now, the only problem with making this, by the way, I must point out, is that you're making a list of all the things you know. You're not making a list yet of all the things you don't know, because it's impossible to make a list of things you don't know. So you usually start by making a list of things you know. So yeah, I know that I didn't treat my hubby that good. So I sinned against my hubby, so husband. And then you might go, what did I do? Well, he was pretty much a mummy's boy, and I got sick of it. And so I started yelling at him and telling him to tidy up after himself. And I got really annoyed with him not picking up his clothes and having to make a meal for him every day and sending him off to work with a lunchbox and all that jazz, you know. So I got sick of him doing that, and I decided I'm going to force him into doing all that himself. But instead of being loving about it and just saying, I'm not going to do it, you need to work it out what you're going to do, I started getting angry because I just wanted him to realise what he was doing, you know. So I started getting angry about him. So that was one of my sins, let's say. I started getting really angry with my husband, right? There we go. And then we go, okay, you know, I'm sick of doing my kids' lunch boxes now that I think about it as well, sending them off to school. And they're like 10 or 11, they could easily do it themselves. But again, I got pretty annoyed with them because they didn't want to do it and they always complained. And I really want them to do it voluntarily. I don't want them to complain all the time, so I'm sick of their complaints. So I'm angry at them too, kids. I'm angry. So I start realising, like, there's a lot of anger in me. So, that's interesting. There's a lot of anger going on. I feel angry with my husband, angry with my kids, feeling pretty annoyed with life generally. I don't get to do much of what I want. So number 3, I've decided I'm going to go off to the spa and get my nails done and get my feet massaged. And this is because I'm loving myself and I'm sick of them. You know, they're not doing anything for me. I'm going to do some things for myself instead. So I go off there and then I start realising, that's really because I'm angry too. Like, you know, because I'm just trying to avoid the fact that there's a lot of things going on in my life where I'm doing things for others and not much for myself. But anyway, I start making a list and I start recognising there are problems in my life. So that's a good thing. But the problem with it so far is that it's all just in my head, isn't it? It's sort of like I'm not really feeling much of it. I just feel mostly annoyed. And I don't even really understand necessarily why I'm so annoyed, but I just feel annoyed. Like when I was in my teens about having a husband and children, I was quite happy about the idea. And I was quite happy about the idea of sending them off to work with a lunchbox and sending my kids off to school with a lunchbox. I was quite happy about it then. But now, 20 years or 15 years later, now I'm actually in the situation for 15 years, I'm going, this isn't very nice at all. Like, to me in particular, it's not very nice. So I'm starting to recognise that actually there must be other things going wrong in my life as well, not just the fact that I'm angry with my husband, but I must be angry for reasons, right? There must be reasons going on. And a lot of this is really about lack of love of self, right? So far in this list, where I'm not loving myself by doing these things for other people. And because from start, I don't want to do them. And the reality is you're not loving other people either if you just don't want to do something, but you continue doing it. But you're not loving them either. So you start seeing that you're quite upset and angry. So you start making a list. You get out your notebook and you go, here's one, here's another one, here's another one, here's another one. 5 pages later, still making a list. Now I did do that at the beginning. That's exactly what I did. So I got to about 20 pages of stuff. And I'm going, that's a lot of sin, right? That's a lot of sin. And I'm going, what in the hell do I do about all of this, right? It's sort of like, it's like shocking when you start looking at it properly and you start worrying, and then you got to add worry to your list because you start doing that as well. Fear about getting it, so you add that to your list as well. And it's sort of like, now you got 25 pages and it's still going on. And it's all just like very overwhelming at this stage, intellectually. It's even intellectually overwhelming, isn't it? But, wow. So how does that... Now that you could say that's the start of my awareness. Can you see that? So you could say, by making these lists of all the things that are happening, I am starting to choose to become aware. My awareness is beginning in my mind, intellectually. So that's not a bad thing, by the way, because before then I was completely unaware in every sense. Now I'm at least got some awareness. But what most of us do then is very interesting. What we do then, after we've made this sort of list that we become aware of, is that we start trying to act differently. So what we try to do is we go, I'm really angry about sending my hubby off to work with a lunchbox every day because it means I've got to get up and he gets up, and if he gets up at 4, I'm get up at 4, and I've got to prepare the meal as well. But it's his lunch, so he probably should do it. But I'm saying to myself, but I've got to do it because a good wife does that, and and also I don't go to work, so I feel a bit of guilt that I don't go to work, so I want to do it for him because he goes to work for both of us, and so I get myself a bit tied up with the whole thing, and what I end up doing is I end up going, well, all I need to do here is change some actions on my part to make it easier on me. So one way we do that is buy some pre-prepared meals and just say shove it in the mic when you get to work, in the microwave. Or we might say, to our children, I'm not preparing your lunches anymore, here's £10. Go and get your lunches every day. So that's alleviated you from the feeling without addressing much at all. You've taken action, but no feelings change.
I was going to say, but also my partner works from home and I homeschool my child, so they don't go away.
And
Right.
does that get annoying?
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. So here we are, we're in this state where we're trying to take a different action, but actually my feelings haven't changed very much, and all I'm really doing is alleviating the result of my previous action by taking a new action. But the underlying emotional reason why I took the action I took is still not addressed. And the underlying reason why I feel about it is still not addressed. So now I'm taking action, thinking I'm doing the right thing and changing, but I'm actually not changing. In my heart, my emotions are still the same. Now, if your focus of making a list is to access the emotions, then the list is purposeful. But if your reason for making a list is because you just want to change your behaviour, then this list is not going to help you. You follow? If my focus of my list is to find the emotional reason why I do something, it has a good purpose. If the reason why I'm making a list is just to change my physical behaviour,
Or to self-punish.
Then this list is not working. It's not going to work for me. Yeah. I'll need to do something in addition. Now, frequently, what we want to do is make a list, change our behaviour. And why do we do that? Why do we make a list? So we feel bad about what we do or what's happening in our life. So we make a list of what's bad in our life. And then we choose to change our behaviour. Why do we do that? So why do we choose to change our behaviour using our mind rather than it be a natural process of growth where we remove emotional reasons why we behave the way we do? There's got to be something going on emotionally, isn't there, where we're very uncomfortable with dealing with emotions.
It's an avoidance.
Oftentimes an avoidance, yes. It's oftentimes the avoidance of the actual emotion. And so what we do is we make the list. So here, let's say, this is a very rudimentary list, of course. If there's only 3 problems in your life, then you're doing pretty good. But anyway. So you make the list, and then you go, okay, my husband, I'm angry about making his meals, so I'm going to just stop making meals. Stop making meals. And I've seen women do this, right? Very angry, of course. Stop making meals. Problem solved.
Well, the emotion's still there, but
Yeah, the emotional reason is why you were making wheels for 15 years, what you were getting out of it, what the purpose of it was for you, the idea that you're giving love to people by making them less self-responsible for their own life. None of those things are addressed. All you've done is stop making wheels, and that's stopped you being angry with your husband, but it actually hasn't stopped all the reasons why you're doing it, which are the real problem, right? So you can see that by taking an action, I've actually sort of convinced myself that I've circumnavigated the problem. I've gotten around the problem. But actually the problem still is in my soul. So the feeling driving me doing it for 15 years or whatever prior is still in my soul. There's an error there. And also, by the way, the feeling driving him to expect it is still in him as well. Because you've not talked about it, you've not addressed it with him as to why he even expects you to do that, right? So you've not actually addressed the problem. So you know what's going to happen then? Your anger will still build up in your soul, and then it's going to turn into stop talking to him. Stop having sex with him. Right? Stop intimacy, in other words. It's going to just become worse and worse because the actual fundamental problem as to why something was done is still not addressed. And why the other person accepted it as loving is still not addressed either. And the problem with doing that is you end up shutting yourself down more and more and more to avoid problems, with the net result being eventually it will be leave him. It won't it? Probably. Leave him, leave my life, find a lover, you know, whatever.
Start making his lunches.
Start making his lunches. Or find a lover that makes my lunch. Is what often happens, you know. Like, I'm sick of this and I'm never going to do it again, so I want the opposite now, which is still a sin, right? So we end up making these changes intellectually, which actually don't address the emotional state that's in error. So if your listing of things and your writing down of things is helping you tune into the emotional reasons why you do things, well, that's great. But if your reason for making a list is to just take a whole series of actions which avoid the problem in the list, then your motive for the list is very much faulty. It's a sin in itself, actually.
Another reason I've written lists is because sometimes I feel so afraid of the emotional content of the sin, or the, you know, how much it feels like it's a way of trying to get a sense of control. Okay, I'll deal with A, and then there'll be B, and then there'll be C. But actually in that process, I've gotten away from the overwhelm that I needed to go through, which was actually fear of just opening up emotionally to the issue. So, yeah. It's just about being sensitive to your motivations, isn't it?
Yeah.
But it's also, I think, part of my thinking about it is wanting to get through the list and have completed the deconstruction process on each one, but because I'm worried my brain won't manage to remember where I'm at with each thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
And what I've come to understand is that your brain is very, very limited and pretty weak tool in this whole process.
Pretty useless device, really.
Yeah. And it gets tricky and it does all these things.
Your brain often is just responding to the emotional demand to continue the sin.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, your brain often is supporting the sin rather than helping deconstruct it.
Yeah.
The only way to deconstruct sin is because all sin is emotional. You have to go through emotions, and this is what most people do by making a list to avoid the emotional process. And there's a deep sense often of frustration about the emotional process. You know, like, how do I find the emotion? Well, this was going to require some sincere longing on your part to find them. You know, in the first century I said to everyone, seek the truth will set you free. You have to seek it. And the only thing that's going to create freedom from your sin is you seeking the truth about it. right? And that requires a sincere desire to seek. In fact, God's made it that way. There's a fair bit of noise out there. Should we close that?
Just close that door.
If we can just close one of those. Maybe the front door, the very front door.
No, it's the air dryers
Oh, it's the drive.
in the toilets.
In the toilet.
Yeah, thanks, Ben.
Yeah, good.
It's you always used to say, Jesus always used to say to me, trust the process that God has you in. And if we go back to the start of the discussion about God's laws, like God's laws are working to help us in this awakening to sin process. So while the list, as Jay said, could be helpful in some ways, if you're using the list to prevent just kind of going into this process with God, where you're seeking for the sins to be pointed out to you emotionally by the law through your sincere attitude, and just allowing each new one to be exposed and dealt with as it comes up, then the list is working against you. If the list is do you sort of see what I mean there? Often we want to be in control of how it's going to go. And
Emotionally,
control. Like, it's good to want to see all of our sins, but if we're using the list to go, right, I'm going to deal with mum issues these 6 months, and then dad issues after that, and then I'll look at my kids, the way I've treated my kids after that, because that'll be a lot clearer after I've done those two. It just doesn't work. I tried. It doesn't work. And it's frustrating, and you're like, no, God, I'm on dad issues. Why do you keep bringing me this stuff with the kids? You know, I can't think about that now. I can't feel about that now.
But I'm also really aware that the child issues are because of my dad issues, but yeah, obviously humility's what it comes down to at the end. But while I'm with my child and he's talking at me, like I've found it easier since I started feeling a few years ago. I can do it when I'm really relaxed, just on my own in my room. But that's not cutting it anymore. I need to be with my child a lot. We need to go to groups, homeschooling. There's so many. What I need to do with my fear of doing education badly, so I can see God's perspective on it as well. But yeah, just prioritising, as you said, that time to feel. But yeah, doing it with other people is something I really haven't got to.
Well, there's a lot involved with doing it with other people, because you know, there's embarrassment and shame and other things that happened in your childhood, where you were ashamed when you cried, or made to feel embarrassed when you cried, or made to feel embarrassed about having any emotion for the most part. There's a lot of reasons why.
My face looks quite gormless as well, and then my partner sort of sees my face relaxing and I'm feeling, he's like, you alright? But again, it's dealing with that shame of how it looks to others.
Yeah. But if you can just go back for a moment, the desire to feel, the true desire to feel, will drive you into a state of feeling, not in an unloving, driven manner, but it will lead you there. And I think we need to also, perhaps for the last few minutes, because it's near the end of our day, let's just, just a few things I'd like to say about God's process that he's got you through. And this applies to all of his children. So it's a very loving process that God has us going through. And if I can just say what it is. Firstly, God is trying to share to you via the conscience truth. So if you think, so the conscience is a part of your soul, so I'll just draw it as a complete soul. God's trying to share via the conscience truth with you. That's to help you. It's to help you become happier. When God can't share information via the conscience, he's also attempting to provide information to other souls who can share information with you. The first one of those is a guardian. Guardian, which is a spirit who's been assigned to help you with spiritual matters. only if you desire to progress with spiritual matters. And it also has a guide that God's trying to help you with truth. And the guide's general thing is to try to protect you. So he's trying to help you with things like if your relationship is potentially going to bring you harm, then your guide's going to be trying to share information with you about that as well, show you where that's happening, right? Then God also created a whole heap of laws, right? The law of attraction in particular, and the law of cause and effect, to help you come to terms with what's going on for you. So that attracts events, and you will be faced with those events in order to help you deal with problems. So if you think about it, the law is already exposing to you your next thing you need to deal with. If you're emotionally sensitive, you will know straight away what that is, right? Now, anything that develops into a physical problem, as we've already seen, is indicative of a denied thing way, way back emotionally, right? So every physical problem you have is an attraction to help you see something's going on emotionally. But you've got all of these methods, and then on top of that, God is trying to influence people on earth, so other souls on earth who are face to face with you to talk with you so you can be helped with some of your problems. So God's got all of these things going on all the time with every one of us, and how much influence that has upon us, it depends upon our openness to that influence. And that means it's dependent upon our sensitivity to the influence. The more aware we become, the more sensitive we become to the influence. So we start saying, there's an indication, another problem, there's an indication, another issue, there's an indication, another issue. And of course, this is happening with all of the laws at any one time, but the thing that's going to have the most bearing on you is also the most intense attraction. So what that means is, whatever is in your face should be the first thing you deal with. You follow? If you just keep dealing with whatever is in your face right now, you'll be dealing with the next thing that God feels is the most important thing to deal with. So this is what happens in the spirit world. Most people are only helped on the next thing. They don't make great big lists, even though in front of most people there is Nero had hundreds of thousands of things on his list, literally. But God's laws were just trying to help him deal with the next biggest thing. The thing that was going to help him the most in the moment. You follow? And so if you allow the laws to work in the way they're intended to, you'll be able to see straight away what the next thing is. And then you need to be sincere about it and start dealing with it. You can pray about it. You can also become aware of it. And then you've got to go through to the process of awakening of it. But if you focus on the thing that is being brought to you constantly, so if in other words, the thing causing you most distress in your life is your relationship with your children, then that's your next biggest thing. If the thing that's causing you the most distress in your life is your relationship with your partner, that's the next biggest thing. If it's to do with what's going on at work, then that's the next biggest thing. You just need to deal with the next biggest thing, and then the next biggest thing after that will come. You follow? Making a list means you want control of the next biggest thing. So good luck with that. the control of the next biggest thing.
I tried.
Mary's tried that. I did it for a while until I recognised that God was always bringing me the next biggest thing anyway. And all I needed to do was focus on what I was attracting, the next biggest thing, and then I could work through it. Now, there are times in that process where I've got to work through awareness through to awakening, and then I use a notebook a lot, actually. Yeah. Like, that helps me a lot to go, okay, the next biggest thing is this. What do I know about it already? What do I think I know about it? I pray about it. What do I think I know about it? I often write down a lot of things there. But I only focus on that next biggest thing. Yeah. So at the moment, my next biggest thing is love of self, and that's why I need to finish now. Now, just one heads up about tomorrow. We're going to start again at 11 o'clock. But we're going to introduce one additional topic to the conversation, and that is the spirit influence that's under with regard to sin. So we're going to introduce that to it. And what we may start to do tomorrow is start to do a little bit of channeling, trying to see how spirits are influencing some of the sins as well. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that way we get a more rounded view of the influences that are upon us, both on a physical level, but also on a spiritual level, on our spirit body and our physical body as a result of that. So that's what we want to do tomorrow. And so we'll catch up with you guys at 10ish, 11ish, sorry. And we'll probably open up about 10ish.
Yeah.
Mary and I will need to do a few things now to do our normal routine. We've got a bit of a routine now as to what we have to do with our recordings and all those kind of things. And so we'll do that now. So we probably won't be able to catch up with you personally now. But with regard to tomorrow, I was just thinking there's part of the day where those of you who are not coming to Damahan might want to ask some other types of questions late in the afternoon. And we also probably want to share with you a bit about our future plans. So we might just allocate maybe a half an hour at the end of the day tomorrow just to answer some of those questions for those of you who will not be here next week.
Who will be here?
Who will be here next?
Who won't be? Who won't be?
Who won't be here next week?
Yeah.
Quite a few. Yeah. So it gives you a chance to ask questions related to that as well. So our general plan tomorrow will be, we'll continue on the discussion. We'll introduce the whole idea of some spirit influence into the discussion. We will do probably a little bit of channeling in a practical way. And then by the time we get to about 3 tomorrow afternoon, we'll look at just stopping that conversation and just answering any questions you have about plans and other things unrelated to the topics we've been discussing, but not personal issues, more about plans for the future and things like that. Make sense?
Yes.
Good. We'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you.